We're going to mill this log up, and a couple things that I always do is I paint the end of the logs as soon as they're dry enough to hold the paint. They start to crack very quickly. I paint them before I even cut them. That way it's a little easier than painting every board after you do it. But they start drying out so fast they begin to crack. So I like to paint them all, the ends. But it has to be obviously not soaking wet. You've got to have them dried enough. But it only takes a few days for the end to dry enough, and you'll start to see all the little cracks forming in the log because it's drying quickly at the end, wicking the moisture out. So we're going to set the ladder up for the first cut. I have the other walk-along beam cutter, but we're going to do this with the ladder. I use ratchet straps. I actually put 3 of them, and I move them as I go to make the first cut nice and level and square. So we'll start by getting the ladder in place. So I'm setting up the saw in the mill, and something I do, I have never seen anybody else doing it, and maybe they do, but I used to get so frustrated with trying to set up the right thickness for a cut. There's little measurements on the side of these things, and sometimes they're even offset. They're not equal from one side to the other. So what I do is I get some blocks of wood, and you can see that I have 1 1/2 and I have 1 7/8, and then when you flip them I have 1 1/8. I have different dimensions the other way. So I put the blocks in place. I loosen the lock nuts for the height. I lift it up, I put the blocks in, and I drop the frame down on the blade, just as if, so it's the exact thickness I'm going to cut now, and it's guaranteed that it's the same at the saw end, at the power head end, as it is at the other end. So you're not going to end up trying to cut crooked or anything like that. It's going to be perfect, and it takes seconds to set up this way. I'm always cutting the same thicknesses. I've got some larger blocks for starting. I have a whole bunch of different blocks depending what I'm going to cut, and I throw them in, and in just a matter of 30 seconds the saw is readjusted to cut a different size. So I'm going to set it up here. We're going to throw it on the board here. The log we're set up. I've got the 3 straps holding it down, and I get part way and then I just remove a strap and kind of continue on. There's the log with the first piece cut off. I'll admit sometimes it is easier to use the screws through the ladder just to screw it on, especially when you have flat logs. If you have a log that's got all kinds of bumps in it, the ratchet straps really work well. But if I do have the ladder with the holes drilled in it, I like to just screw the ladder on also, or use my beam cutter for the first cut. So as you can see, first cut is done. Now I'm going to readjust the saw using the same method that I did to set it up the first time, but I'm going to set it up for 1 7/8 thick and cut a slab off. So now set up with 1 7/8 for a thickness cut, and you can see I just laid the blocks in there, loosened the slider bolts both sides. It drops right down. It's exactly set for 1 7/8. Tighten them back up and away you go. It takes less than a minute to change the thickness of cut this way. Have a really nice clean cut, beautiful slab, very nice, very smooth, almost looks like it was cut with a mill, with a sawmill. It's so smooth, no chain marks, very nice. I'm cutting with a Holtzforma G660. It's 92 cc's. Works really well. This thing has lots of miles on it and runs like the day I bought it, so I have no complaints. It's just a standard knockoff Alaska mill, but I've added a few things. As you can see, this frame, so this is a push bar system I made, and I use the same throttle connection and a bicycle handbrake as I do on my beam cutter that I have another video for. So this is actually really slick. So you can see I've just cut notches in the pipe and it slides over on each side. It's perfectly square, has a throttle control. Once I start the cut by hand, I just can stand up and push it along and control the throttle. So if you want more details, you can see my other video with the beam cutter. However, it's just a homemade setup with a piece of aluminum channel, and again, the bicycle cable just clicks in it. Works really good and makes it very nice to actually cut, as opposed to crawling along on the ground all the time when I'm in the bush or here. Finally, I always like to mill downhill. So even if I have to use a log to lift the starting end higher, that's what I do. The saw will almost feed itself when you're going downhill. It doesn't have to be a big angle, but a slight angle is better than nothing, and you'll work a lot less if you're actually milling slightly downhill instead of level or up. Anyway, just another little tidbit.